we give them the power to actually have some authority in using what they've decided, what they found, and what they've investigated. So that's basically the thing I want to talk about. Three things. What do you guys think of the plan? What can be better about the plan? Then we're going to go into how we pick the people, and then what do we do after the investigation? So if anybody has some comments on what I've already proposed, I'd love to hear it.
Let me find your proposal, because I don't actually have that in front of me.
Well, I can run it down. I actually know it off the top of my head.
Okay.
All right.
Good.
Basically, what I'm planning on doing is a police accountability review board, community based, and this community review board is going to basically be comprised of all citizens. There will not be any police officers in it at all, period. Now, another thing it's going to be is it's going to have three freestanding locations, one in North County, one out towards the beach, and one in South St. Pete. And these are going to be storefronts, very small operations where people can feel comfortable walking in and making a complaint against an officer, making a complaint against anybody in the government, actually. We're also going to be I'm going to be initiating a political corruption unit where we're going to go after code enforcement officers, county officials, mayors, whoever in this county is committing any kind of corruption. We're going to be investigating that at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department. But I want to have a place where people feel like they can come, not the police department. If you've ever tried to make a complaint in the police department, you know how ridiculous that is. They badger you, bully you, try and make you leave, intimidate you, all kinds of things. And I don't want that to happen. So these people at these individual locations, some of them will actually be paid. I will, as the sheriff, be funding the offices, funding the equipment, and paying some of the staff members, especially support staff members, people that answer the phone, people that do filing, people that do copying, that type of thing. And then I also have the ability, a lot of people don't know this, but I have the ability to actually deputize regular citizens. So Josh, if you were working for me in that capacity, I can literally give you a Pinellas County Sheriff's badge. Now, that badge doesn't allow you to be a police officer. It doesn't allow you to go arrest anybody or to use deadly force or carry a gun. But that badge would carry the same weight as if you were an investigative detective. You can flash that badge and people have to tell you the truth or it's a crime. You can use that badge and your authority with that badge to get subpoenas, to get warrants, to get everything you need to see everything. Now, as someone myself who wants to work with some agency like this, I'm going to have an office down at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department that all three of these offices can come and use anytime. They will have the keys to the records department. They will have full access to every single thing that the police officers that are investigating the use of force incident have. They will get the call when there's a police use of force incident. They will be able to go to the scene at the time of the event. They're going to be able to flash their badge and be able to walk up and watch and videotape and body camera and document everything that occurs just like the police officers are. Now, they cannot interfere. They cannot tell the officers what to do, but they certainly can watch and monitor what they're doing. Now, it's my position that the sheriffs that investigate themselves cover up, badger witnesses, hide evidence, plant evidence, do all kinds of things in these scenarios. And then they wind up with a half-assed report and they claim the officer didn't do anything wrong. They give that half-assed report to the state attorney. The state attorney looks over the half-assed report, does his own half-assed report, and miraculously they find that the deputy didn't do anything wrong. So what we're trying to do is not make and create another community review board, because I don't want the community board that I'm setting up to review the work of anybody else. I want them to watch what they're doing up front, not get the half-assed review after everything's done and the officer's been adjudicated free and not guilty, and then they get the report, and then what are they supposed to do? Review the half-assed report that was biased? No. So the whole purpose of my accountability board is that they will literally be investigating these use of force incidents at the same time as the police officers, using the exact same resources the police officers have, with a badge from the Sheriff's Department, and be able to fully investigate just as if they are a Pinellas County detective. That's the overall broad strokes of what I'm trying to set up here.
Okay. I think honestly the most vital part of that would be the process to become one of those, and like that's really tricky. You got to make sure that that's not corrupted at all. It's got to really be community driven, and even that board should have a board that can fire people and replace them or whatever, or fire people and call for another.
I agree with all of that. We're gonna actually get into the nitty gritty of that here in a little bit. But what I'd really like to talk about is does anybody see any way to enhance or improve that general layout? to do something like that? Did I miss something? Is there something else I could add in here? Is there some other facet to the organization that I can create and implement?
Well, I don't know if you can create it, but um my concern is that uh these investigators, once they've finished their report, they're handing it to other government official. Okay, and once you leave office, they're not handing it to you. Um, and then they have to deal with the state's attorney. And there's no way to go directly from this independent witness who's not necessarily an employee of the sheriff's office or other law enforcement agency, getting this to getting their concerns about the situation into a courtroom. Is there a way, and I don't know if there is, to get a grand jury to receive the report from these individuals, rather than going through the district attorney first?
Well, that's part of the process that I want to set up. Now, I know that I have specific limitations just based on the way the law is and everything's structured. The current
Okay.
grand jury scenario these days really irks me because it's a secret meeting and no one's allowed to know. And the only person that's allowed through the front door is the prosecutor who's prosecuting the cop. And he gets to tell them anything he wants. And we don't ever get to hear what he's telling to these people, what information he's giving, what evidence he's presenting. And then they come out of the grand jury and they say, nope, we decided he wasn't guilty. And we don't have any idea what was presented. And I hate the grand jury process because of that. And I'm going to be trying to make grand juries open processes, even to the point where we get to have them on closed circuit TV where you can all watch what these people are saying. So we can finally see these corrupt prosecutors saying what they're telling these people. I don't know whether I'll be able to accomplish that or not, but I know for a fact that I can, as the sheriff, I can take my investigative report, meaning I'm going to investigate this stuff too at the sheriff's office. And the whole concept here would be that I came up with the exact same conclusion that the state attorney came up with and the community board came up with. The idea is we should all match. These reports should be identical. They should all come to the same conclusion one way or the other based on nothing but facts and no bias. Now, as the sheriff, I can guarantee that I can submit the board's investigation report to the state attorney with mine. There isn't really a process to submit the board's report to the state attorney, and I can try and open something like that up and make it a legal, absolute thing that happens all the time. But for right now, the only thing I know I can do is attach theirs to mine and send them both into both the FDLE and the state attorney. What the state attorney does with it at that point, I don't have any control over. Now, I know we've got a corrupt and dirty state attorney, Bernie McCabe. He's been there for way too long. And in my opinion, Bernie McCabe is literally the reason that we have all the corruption that we have here in Pinellas County, both political and police-wise. He is the key master. He's the one that doesn't do anything. He's the one that needs to go. And I'm confident that when I am elected, sometime between the time I'm elected and the time I'm sworn in, he's going to retire and he's going to go on his way. And if he doesn't, I'm going to do everything in my power to push his ass out because he doesn't need to be here anymore. So I don't know all the ins and outs of what I'll be able to do, but I like the idea of not only having the community board do the report, but I like the idea of having the community board itself convene its own citizen grand jury, where we have people come in and they present their evidence to the citizens themselves. And the citizens themselves review it, and they present the evidence to the people, not the state attorney's office, not a closed door, backdoor grand jury. And if we could do something like that and have the people indict the officer, not necessarily legally, but I think that puts an awful lot of pressure on the state attorney to do something. It's like when these videos pop up and they like the Laquan McDonald thing and he didn't do anything wrong. There's no investigation. Oh, wait a second. Then this video leaks out. Now all of a sudden they want to do something because it became public. And so it's the same thing here. If we're doing everything in the light, if we're showing the people the evidence, if we're being transparent in what we're finding in that board, and that board has the autonomous authority to show anything they want to anybody they want, then they can go ahead and convene their own grand jury in any way, shape, or form that they decide to do it. I'd like to try and give it some structure. That's part of what we're talking about here today. What could we do? That's a great idea, but let's give the grand jury to the people.
That's what I was talking about.
Sounds a lot better than Galtieri's plan anyway.
Oh my God. Who else?
What do you think, Aaron?
So I like that idea. I'm a little, I'd be concerned about how much how viable it is, like especially in the short term. But in terms of the accountability board, so well, is your idea to have like the accountability board be the grand jury, or have the people like people selected from the city be grand jury? Like, would you have a jury of peers, or?
It would be my idea, my concept, to have the citizen police accountability board select their own grand jury, whether it be through nomination, whether it be through picking straws out of a hat for people that are interested in doing it. It doesn't really matter how they pick them, but as long as they pick them and allow them to do it. I mean, they could have a grand jury board where they invite a whole stadium of everybody who wants to come, and everybody listens and everybody turns in a vote. Whatever they decide to do, the bottom line is we're going to be shining light on what really happened. And we're going to be exposing the true facts of the investigation, not like they do now, where they get rid of half the facts and you only see what the police want you to see. Now,
yeah, I was going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but one thing you can point out is that the media already does that anyways. Florida's known, the whole Florida man thing is because of how easy it is for media to report just arrests and the ways they can do it. I mean, you've seen the Who's in Jail newspapers your whole life growing up in St. Pete.
Yes.
It's common. They do it anyways, so it wouldn't be out of the box for some, a grand jury to make an opinionated indictment on somebody. I mean, like something that doesn't necessarily have legal basis, but public opinion basis. And it does put power back to the people. One thing that I was going to say that I did like about your idea was to have the complaints go to a separate entity than the police. We had two people at the protests file a complaint on Major Malahat, who is clearly overly aggressive and should not be in the position he's in. And the problems they ran into in the 2 days of trying to file a complaint were ridiculous. And I shouldn't be saying 2 days of trying to file a complaint. It should be like a 30-minute process to maybe an hour. And that's really ridiculous anyways. It should be very fast, easy to do. You should be able to file a complaint on the internet. Honestly, I don't see why you can't file a complaint on the internet and have it come through.
Bingo.
And then have the option to send in, any evidence that you can or whatever. And if there's evidence, they can flag that and look at those and go through. I mean, and in reality, instead of, we're paying so much money for the police for all these things they do. Why can't you pay people to go through these complaints, and not the police, community driven, whatever the community board, but that makes a lot of sense. The fact that you have to go to the police station to file complaints is just outright ridiculous. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, I actually have an email from Sheriff Galtieri, because that's how I became involved in all this, was filing complaints against dirty cops. And I actually have an email from Sheriff Galtieri that says, I'm not going to take any more of your complaints anymore. Stop complaining about officers to me. And when they said that unless I went down and gave a recorded statement under oath, literally a deposition where they swear you in and they tell you you're going to be convicted of perjury if you say anything wrong. And so they said, you have to come down here and give these reports. So finally I said, okay, I'm going to come down there. I went down to the old Internal Affairs Bureau, which used to be next door to the old Pinellas County Sheriff's Department. I walked in the front door and there was 3 of the biggest cops I've ever seen stand in a triangle around me. They led me over to the elevator. The door opened. They pushed me in the back into the elevator, came up against me when I'm in the elevator. When we got out, they walked me all the way down to the end of the hall. When I got to the end of the hall, they opened the last door on the right, and it was literally a broom closet. I mean, they had the mops and the brooms and a sink in there and a light bulb hanging from the ceiling. I thought it was a joke. And they had a little table in there. And they sat me down at this table and they glared at me while I gave them 3 complaints about 3 different officers. They never wrote a thing down. They just stared at me and glared at me. And those complaints went nowhere. And that was after he said, come down and file the complaint. So I know what it's like to be intimidated through this process. And if we have a community board where people go in and those people are dressed in clothes and they are not police officers, and they're wanting you to come in and give their complaints, I think that we'll be able to open up a whole new area of people finally coming forward with their complaints and not being afraid or intimidated, which I think is half the battle.
Hey, this is the boss.
How you doing?
Hey, how you doing, man?
Thanks for coming out tonight. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. I kind of like a lot of the stuff you're saying, but what I'm worried about is practicality, the application, right? So, in St. Pete, we do have a citizens review board, and the way it functions, it's kind of the exact same, right? So
I'm having a hard time hearing you. Is anyone else having a hard time hearing?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, that's better. Yeah, much better.
Okay, now because I got it on speaker. So I like a lot of things you're saying, but with some of these boards, right? They're rubber stamps for the law enforcement. St. Pete has a citizen review board, and it's community led, right? It's community members, but they're stacking the deck. So that same learning from that, I would ask, like, how would you ensure, right, that it's a true community board and that it has teeth, right? Because a lot of these boards and committees or whatever they're called are nothing more than rubber stamps with no real authority or no real way to hold the police accountable. And so that's my concern.
Well, those are good concerns, and that's one of the reasons why I've asked you to come here today and voice your opinions. I don't know what the best way to pick this community board members are to make sure that they are not stacking the deck, or that they're police driven, or that they're somehow biased towards the police industry, like every one of these boards I've ever seen is. So if you have a suggestion of how we can select these people to ensure that that doesn't happen, that's one of the reasons why I've invited you all here to tell me. If you have any ideas of how we can make sure that they are community driven, let's hear it. Are we going to pick these people with a lottery? Are we going to pick them by community, where the community nominates them, where the community votes on them? Do we have the ability to set something like that up? We can literally do anything we want to. This is a brand new idea, brand new concept. When I'm sheriff, we can implement whatever it is that we decide here today.
So go ahead, Jay.
Now, the community board that I'm talking about having some actual paid staff members that get badges. But there's also going to be a lot of volunteers and people that can work with these agencies too, and go and be with them as like a secondary officer to the one that has the badge. So there's going to be a lot of people that are involved in this, but I want to try and find a way to make sure that the people that we're giving the most authority to have a certain amount of wherewithal to understand the investigation, to understand a little bit about maybe science, or maybe the forensic of a crime scene, or maybe the law and that sort of thing. These guys have to have some basis in knowledge to even know if the cops are doing something wrong or not doing something wrong. They have to
I
know.
disagree with that. I'm going to make the assertion that everyone can observe what happens and simply repeat to whomever what happened. Everyone can stand there with a video recorder and see what happened and simply report what happened without knowing the science behind whatever. And if there's a question that the cops feel that they're doing something right, then the cop can publicly make his justification before the board or before the court, not somebody going to some law book in some back room somewhere and saying, oh, but this law over here says it's okay, we can't really mess with him about that. Make the police officer justify his actions before the public, before the board, unless he doesn't want to come before the board, and then he can just answer it in the court date. But if somebody sees an officer doing something and records it and reports it to the board, whether the board knows that he's done something that's against the law or not, let them press him to answer in person, in public, why he did what he did. And if it doesn't sound good, then take him to a prosecutor.
Well, I think maybe I misspoke and maybe didn't make myself clear enough. I don't want these people to be making the initial decision of whether the cop did or didn't do something wrong. What I'm talking about is like for the correct collection of evidence. Like they should know, as an example, that if a cop is at a scene and he's collecting evidence from a police killing, that the person who's collecting the evidence should take off the glove in between each time they pick up a new piece of evidence. Something simple like that. Because like in the Timothy Verdon case, even though that guy was handcuffed behind his back and he was sitting in the back seat of the car, they supposedly did a DNA test on Timothy Verdon's gun, and supposedly that man's DNA found its way to that guy's gun, even though it was never taken out of the holster. And I have a lot of serious questions about how something like that occurred. And you can cross contaminate evidence very easily, and you can do that on purpose to give Timothy Verdon an alibi. Oh, look, he did touch his gun. There's DNA evidence on there. So all I'm saying is that who's ever going to have the power to carry that badge and go on the scene where they're actually investigating it, they get the call at the same time the police does, that they're going to know if they're doing something wrong right away. Hey, change your gloves. Hey, you can't talk to that witness like that. Hey, and just basically keeping an eye on what they're doing to make sure they do everything right through the whole process. And that's all I'm talking about, having a good idea, a concept of forensics and what the law is about who they should be talking to, who they shouldn't be talking to, how it should be handled. That's it.
That should take what, a 2-hour training maybe?
Yeah, it shouldn't take much. Yeah, it shouldn't take much.
I think anybody that you select for that job would be up for that. I don't think there's a heavy screening that you have to do to put people through that. I mean anybody, grandmothers, anybody, teenagers can do that.
Well, this is going to be a paid position that I'm going to pay out of the sheriff's department, but they're not going to have any responsibility to answer to me or the sheriff's department or anybody else. They only answer to themselves. All I'm going to be doing is putting forth the funds so that they can operate without having to worry about feeding themselves or paying for the paper to go in the copy machine, that kind of stuff.
Well, I get that. My challenge with that is this: you're not going to be sheriff forever. And there's no guarantee that the next guy is going to be as noble-minded as you. And once you set up a board that's tax funded, generally what happens is eventually the politics get involved and that board gets pressured one way or the other to lean in the direction of the police. And so while I see the benefit that could go to the people who are showing up to answer the questions for folks and be a part of that board, to having those people on the payroll, I really think it introduces something that could become a liability down the road. I want government accountability without adding another layer of bureaucracy.
Without funding,
and I understand that you're not trying to create a separate bureaucracy, but it seems like another internal affairs board if those people are on the payroll and carrying badges. I understand that's not what you're trying to do, but it just seems to be entangled that way. And what I would like to do is see if we can do something to get away from having it either attached directly by funding to the sheriff's office. I'd like to see it not funded by the government at all. I understand the concept of it, but having the 3 offices and having people running those 3 offices on a volunteer basis, I know that it can get hairy when you're dealing with volunteers, but I think that there are enough people who are concerned about police misconduct these days that they could do that. They could adequately staff those offices on a volunteer basis without losing their shirts and still be able to do an effective job, especially if you're going to go in there and reduce the tax burden that the sheriff's office is placing on the community. I think that goes a long way.
Well, the problem is that without the initial funding, it will never happen. The community's not going to come up, pitch up their own money. And then if they do that and they're totally on the outside, they will have no authority. They will not be let into the investigations. There will be no way to allow them access to these things. And that's why, like you say, having a sheriff like me makes something like this possible. And if I'm feeling like if I can set things up and get it to where it's functioning, it's working, and the people are liking it, and the results are fantastic, I think that the community would not allow it to go away after that. And if they decided to try and pull the funding at that point in time and pressure them, well, sure, the community can then pitch in and say, hey, let's fund this ourselves, let's donate to this, and try and keep it running if they try and put that kind of pressure on. But without the initial funding, without me paying for those offices and putting them in place and giving them the authority to look over our shoulder at everybody else's, it won't exist. It can't exist.
I see.
Ms. Bristol, do you have any comments you'd like to add in here? Can you unmute, Ms. Bristol?
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I was trying to pick up on the full understanding of what was being said and what we're actually asking for. So initially, I thought we were talking about having something similar to what St. Pete has, and theirs called a Citizen Police Review Committee. A board typically has more power than a committee has. A committee has little, next to none. Sounds like a bake sale or something, a committee for the bake sale. So is that the beginning of the conversation, creating some type of citizens review board around complaints?
Yes.
Because I missed the beginning.
Yeah, let me explain a little bit. First off, I cannot stand review boards. And the reason I can't stand review boards is because they typically are only shown what the police wants them to see after the investigation's already been done and biased and the officer's already been covered up for and there's nothing left to see. They don't get to see all the evidence. They don't get to hear everything. So what I'm talking about more is an autonomous board outside the police agencies. They are not police officers. They are citizens. But that I actually have the authority to deputize them and give them a badge so that they can be at the scene of the actual police killings. They can watch the whole process from the beginning. They can wear body cameras. They can collect the evidence. They do a simultaneous parallel investigation, mostly keeping an eye on the police to make sure they do things the right way and making sure evidence doesn't get lost, witnesses don't get pushed off to the side and intimidated, things like that. And then they create their own report. They have access to all the same reports that the police department does. They have access to the records. They have access to the medical examiner's reports. They have access to the lab reports. They have access to everything to make sure that it's not just cop eyes that get to look at this and then decide what gets put in their report. And the whole idea is to not let them get away with it. Does that make clearer?
Is there anything like this happening anywhere else around the country? Is there a model that we're following, or are we breaking ground?
We're creating the new model of it's not a police review board, it's a police accountability board, meaning they're going to have the power and the authority like no other agency or board or review committee has ever had in the entire United States.
And you're based on the crime rate in Pinellas County in terms of murder or other. How many people do you foresee being able to add to this board to manage what the cases?
Well, they're not going to be reviewing crimes. They're only going to be reviewing complaints against officers at every agency. And they're going to be reviewing police complaints from every single police agency that operates within Pinellas County, Tarpon Springs Police, Clearwater Police, St. Pete Police. And so basically it's not reviewing crimes. It's literally just reviewing crimes that police commit, complaints against police officers, so that the community can investigate these police officers, and we stop allowing the police to investigate the police because we see how that's worked. It hasn't.
So it still sounds like something that happens after it's initiated by a complaint, right?
Yes, a complaint has to start it all, or an officer killing or an officer use of force event.
Okay. So no, that's the reason I'm thinking about that is that when we were talking about the ability to collect evidence, which happens probably at the same time that the incident occurs, but you probably not likely get that complaint at the same time, listening to some of the dialogue before, trying to see how that would work, what's the intent here. So this is posted happening. So now they're still left with the whatever information has been written and reviewing that and being able, maybe they're deputized to be able to ask questions, question the officers, question the victims in this case, et cetera. Like that's what you mean?
Well, yes and no. The first part, no. And what I mean by that is that these officers that are working these crimes, as soon as they get a call that there's been an officer killing, that call has to go out to the community review board from the area that the phone call was, that the incident occurred in. So literally the same call, same time the ambulance gets called, the police gets called, the community review board gets called, or the community accountability board gets called too. And they literally show up on the scene right as the same time everybody else is. They have the badge to be able to get past the crime tape. No police officer will be able to tell them to get away, stay away, not do anything. I mean, you'll have to have certain things where you don't trample through and walk on blood and things like that. But they will have the ability to be right there from the very beginning of these investigations without the police telling them to go away, go home, stay out of there, you're not allowed here. They will have full access.
And then in your estimation, how many of these would we need for it to be effective based on, trending or records that you've looked at?
Well, I'm hoping that when I come in when I come in the sheriff's office, I'm going to fire the 50 officers with the most complaints. I'm going to review the 100 officers with the next most complaints. And I'm hoping that I'm going to get rid of at least a quarter of the officers at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department that are bad. So I'm hoping that alone will make us have less of these cases. But I have no idea of knowing, because right now we have no real way of knowing how many complaints are filed, because most of the complaints that are filed with the sheriff's office get bullied out of actually being filed. So we might have all kinds of complaints.
All right. So if we don't even deal with the complaint component and we deal with just the police, you said in the future case, if a police fires a shot or anything like that, the folks would still be engaged at that same moment. Even based on that, do we have an estimation?
Well, I'm looking at just having the 3 locations. I'm looking at staffing that with perhaps 2 people from each location that will be deputized with the badge so they can investigate. But they can still have additional staff at those locations that will still be able to go out and do everything. There'll just be the main guy, which has the authority to be at the crime scene. Other people can sit there and review all the police reports. Other people can sit there and go through the medical examiner's reports, or listen to all the interviews of the witnesses and write notes about what they said and things that came up in their interviews that seem to be a little suspicious. They have the ability to then create questions. We will have the ability through this agency will have the ability to go re-interview witnesses. So if there's something that comes up and the police ask some questions, but they didn't ask a hard question, or there was an inconsistency that they missed, we'll be able to follow up and go back there. And these people will have the authority to make that person sit down and re-interview and ask the questions. So there can be all types of different levels of support, all types of different levels of authority within these boards. And that's what we're going to have to just create. We're going to have to figure out what works the best, and we're just going to have to implement it.
When you're talking about the 3 locations, where are those?
One's going to be in North Pinellas County, one's going to be out by the beaches, and one's going to be in South St. Pete. Just spread around so that one's close enough to everybody.
Got you. So, and then the other question I have is, based on what you said about terminating officers that have, or deputies that have had excessive complaints filed, do you believe that we have too many deputies today and therefore we could afford to lose or reduce the number of deputies, or is that not what you're saying?
Oh, no, I absolutely believe that we have too many deputies. And one of the reasons that I base that is, as sheriff, I'm going to be ending all cannabis enforcement, all of it, across the board. I think that locking people up over a plan is asinine. And according to Sheriff Galtieri, he says that about 1/3 of his business, he called it a business, was cannabis enforcement. So if I end cannabis enforcement and we have a $325 million budget, and that's 1/3 of that budget is cannabis enforcement, then we've just saved $100 million. And we also don't need literally 1/3 of the deputies that are out there. So I think that I can clean house, get rid of a bunch of deputies and cannabis enforcement, and focus those deputies not on policing for profit, not on unconstitutional pretextual stops to try and search your car for something, and instead focus them on actual crimes. 80% of the crimes here in Pinellas County go unsolved that are reported to Sheriff Galtieri, unsolved. And we have people pulling people over for stupid tickets and arresting them for open beer containers. And that's just all got to stop. So I think that I can do twice as much with half the number of officers as Sheriff Galtieri.
Yeah.
You disagree?
Do I disagree? I'm processing what you're saying because of how my mind works. So I'm just listening to what you're saying. And I mean, since there's just a few of us on the call, I wouldn't mind having an open dialogue about when you're saying to stop enforcement on cannabis and so forth. Is that illegal, or is it not illegal?
Well, I don't have the authority to make something legal or not legal. What I do have the authority to do is to say that as the sheriff, I have the right to keep the peace here in Pinellas County. And I don't find anything peaceful about locking people up over a plant. And I also find that's an incredible waste of our resources. So as sheriff, I have the ability to say, I will not waste one more penny of the taxpayers' dollars locking people up over a plant. And then I can just instruct my deputies, no more pulling people over, no more I smell pot in your car, no more get out of the car, let me search your car, no more arrests, no more citations. It's over, it's done. And if people want to grow pot in their backyard, I'm not going to bother with them. If people want to smoke a joint out on the beach, we're going to leave them alone. And I also believe that by making Pinellas County a cannabis-free county, a cannabis-friendly county, I honestly believe that I can double tourism in 2021 and solve the problems that we're having right now with all the COVID-19 lockdowns. I think I can literally heal our community with that by becoming a cannabis-friendly county.
Because there's that many people who use cannabis.
If they want
They
to.
need it.
Yeah, if they want to, they can.
I say there's that many people who use cannabis, and I think it's because they need to. Cannabis calms people's nerves and helps them relax from a lot of the stresses that they're facing in life. That's why it's such a popular plant. It helps people process things more slowly instead of reacting too quickly to something. And so I've only know this because I've talked to other people who use it. I've never used cannabis in my life, but I've seen what other people have said about how it helps them to get through life on an even plane rather than flying off the handle or doing something stupid. I've seen it help people with Parkinson's disease. I mean, right there on video, you see them go from shaking uncontrollably to being in complete control of every muscle in their body. And it's amazing. So I'm completely against cannabis enforcement. I'm against the entire war on drugs. And I think that it would be a great thing to have cannabis enforcement ended completely and to focus officers and deputies on crimes that actually have victims. I mean, right now we have a terrible, in the city of St. Petersburg, there are 200 unsolved murders and there are 500 police officers. How do we have 200 unsolved murders and 500 police officers? That makes no kind of sense.
Well, I know exactly how I'm going to handle that. Have you ever seen what happens when somebody shoots at a cop? Have you ever seen what the response is when somebody shoots at a cop? They have
Like 10 of them.
They have 500 officers, 3 helicopters. They swarm the whole neighborhood. They're going to find that guy. Now, that is a classic example of what the police industry can do in the event of a shooting. But what do they do in South St. Pete when someone's shot and dead? They send 1 or 2 cops over, they stand around, they take a few pictures, they take the body away. They might ask a couple people some questions, and that's the end of it because they just don't care. But why can't we have that same exact response for any killing, for any shooting, for any murder, for anybody? I don't understand why we can't do that. And that's part of what I'm going to be implementing at the sheriff's office. We should have the same response for anybody that's killed in Pinellas County, whether it's a police officer or a citizen.
Thank you.
There's so many simple solutions here. And they're just common sense things that should have been done from the very beginning. I'm not only going to not arrest people for cannabis, I'm not going to be arresting people for personal use drugs. I'm not going to be arresting people for paraphernalia, open container, minor trespassing, all of these little non-victim crimes that we currently incarcerate and criminalize people for has to stop. And that's why, Ms. Bristol, when you were talking about, do you have enough officers? Oh, yes. If we eliminate that kind of ridiculous police stuff, we have plenty of officers if we stop arresting people for nothing.
Yes.
Did you want to say something, Mr. Reeves?
No, I did before when we were talking about, you were talking on the whole marijuana thing, but I forgot what I was going to say. That's why I put my hand down. I do apologize.
Oh, that's all right. Pipe in anytime, okay?
Jeremy, did you forget because you were actually just smoking some marijuana?
I wasn't actually. Never mind. I'm not going to go there. But I think my question had to do with the board, and it also had to do with people with previous charges. I don't have any myself, but I don't think you would have any power over clearing other people's previous charges after you do away with marijuana arrests and stuff. But for this board, since that's what we're here talking about, with these arrests or not arresting people, decriminalizing marijuana in the way that you want to do it, would your board then be having drug tests and testing for marijuana to make sure these people aren't on drugs or smoking?
No, that's if somebody on the board wants to smoke cannabis in their private time, I don't have a problem with that. It's not our business to enforce morality laws. Police don't need to be enforcing bedroom laws. They don't need to be enforcing sex laws. They don't need to be enforcing personal consumption laws. I'm going to stop ending people for personal use drugs. I'm going to be stopping arresting people for a whole slew of things. And we're going to focus on actual crimes. And there's no reason to tell someone you can't work on our board because you smoked a joint.
And I do have another question about, I know you were having this meeting to kind of figure out how we would choose these people. And you spoke about a lottery and an election and this kind of thing. But what kind of qualifications are you looking for these people to have exactly? Like, you want them to have at least 2-year college, 4-year college? You want them to have different licenses and different things? Like, what are you looking for these people to have? You want just any Tom, Dick, and Harry out of the neighborhood to come and sit on this board to know or go through the 2-hour training and know these things? Because I know some of these like bloodborne pathogen classes and different things that these CSI techs use at these crime scenes are a lot longer than a 2-hour class. So the stuff that you're asking people to do or go in and oversee is stuff that people have had years of training to do. And you're asking a community person to come in and oversee this after taking a 2-3 hour class. I'm just trying to understand how you foresee this working. Because I'm for it. I'm just afraid that what we're expecting and what you want to do is not the same thing.
Well, that's why we're having these conversations. That's why I'm open to anything that you would suggest here, anybody. The whole point is I want this to work, but at the same time, it has to be effective. And the people that are on this board should have a reasonable amount of intelligence to know what they're talking about so that we can hold these officers accountable. But should we put a bunch of restrictions and say you can't do it if this, that, or the other? I don't agree with that. I know some people that don't have any college education that are incredibly brilliant people. I also know people that have high degrees and multiple degrees, and I mean, they're idiots. And so I don't think that should be the stepping stone. I think the stepping stone should be, can they understand what the task is and can they do it well? And that would be it.
I will say this, the Bible, and I know we're not going to become a biblical society, but this is the reason for the suggestion. The Bible has a model that each neighborhood picks a judge based on that person's integrity in the community. And I think that kind of thing could help. It's basically the neighborhood nominating somebody that they trust to oversee complaints that are brought to them. That's what the system was in the Bible. And I'm thinking that yes, in the law of Moses. And I'm thinking that we could do something like that. Ask people, hey, do you know somebody who has the intelligence and the integrity to oversee this kind of thing? And you go through different neighborhoods. I live in Oakwood Gardens. There's Magnolia Gardens across from me. There's Allendale not too far from me. We could go through all those neighborhoods and say, hey, who do you know who has this kind of integrity that might like to sit on this board? We could do that.
Well, I like that concept a lot. And if we're going to have 3 different locations here, I'd like the communities around those locations to pick who's going to be working at that location. I mean, to me, that makes perfect sense. We just have to figure out a process that we would go through to allow that to occur. Have any ideas?
I feel like I don't want to go to a test mind state, or just like having to test people to be on this board. But I feel like like you said, there should be a certain education level to do this. And I mean, it's complicated, I don't know, my mind's frazzled.
Well, it is complicated, but I'm picturing a hierarchy within the organization itself. What I mean by that is, maybe the guys at the top of the spectrum that do have more training or more understanding of what we're talking about, that have the badges, may have a little bit more of that type of experience. And then there could be all kinds of people working in the office. There could be someone whose job it is just to go pick up police reports and bring them back for investigation. And whatever happens, I want everybody that's involved in this board to have an equal opinion. So if there's 5 people or 6 people or 8 people that are working at the beach location, then I want all 5 of those people to be able to sit down and each have an opinion about what's going on, to be able to tell people what they want, what's going on, what they think, what they, have a voice. And then after they get done with their voice, I'd like them to bring more community members in and discuss what they're finding and what they're doing. I'd like the community to be involved in this as much as I possibly can, or better yet, as much as the community is interested or willing to. If they want to their own police, they come be a part of it. Open door.
One of these other questions I have, let's say, since we're reviewing and going through with this evidence and stuff, let's say we find a discrepancy in a reporter or discrepancy in evidence. What authority do we have to hold these officers accountable? Because we're just civilians. I mean, you might give us the badge, you might deputize us, well, the group, but what kind of power do they have to hold these people accountable?
Well, the persons that have the badge will actually have the authority of the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department to act as an investigator, as if they were one of my police officers, but they're not. That's the beauty of deputization. They have all the power, but they're not related to the police. And these people can force somebody to answer a question, or they can go back and reconvene a deposition. They can demand that we go back and ask these persons questions. To give you an example, I don't know whether any of you are familiar with the Howard Skaggs killing of Laborio Felton. That happened in 2002. Howard Skaggs is the same deputy that chased the 3 girls into the pond and drowned them. In 2002, he also chased another 18-year-old black male named Laborio Felton into a pond, and then he beat him unconscious and drowned him. And in the police reports from that particular incident, Howard Skaggs and Deputy James Vickers both said that they saw Laborio Felton swimming away from them. In fact, Howard Skaggs made a joke about it, that he was doing the backstroke across the pond. Well, I have the photographs from that crime scene. This pond was choked with weeds and branches. Nobody was swimming anywhere in that thing. It would have been literally impossible. Now, another thing that was interesting is I got the medical examiner's report, the autopsy from that. And Laborio Felton had a massive brain injury on the left side of his head. And he had brain hemorrhages, literally where sections of his brain broke out of the membrane and made contact with other sections of the brain. Now, if you're a boxer, you get hit across the chin, your brain shifts in your brain. If it touches the side of your skull, you get knocked out, and that's how a knockout happens. So with his brain literally broken out of sections of his membrane and making contact with each other, there's no way in hell that Laborio Felton was conscious after he got beat. He got beat unconscious, and then they either held him in the water and drowned him, or they released him unconscious and let him sink. Either way, they murdered that boy. And so here, there's a clear discrepancy. The medical examiner's report should have said, wait a minute, this guy was unconscious based on his injury. There's no way he could have been swimming. Nobody ever brought that up. Nobody ever raised that question. So when I'm sheriff, I'm going to reopen that question. I'm going to arrest Howard Skaggs, and we're going to get to the bottom of that. But see, this is what I'm talking about as far as going over the evidence and finding out things. We would have this agency have the ability and the power and the authority to ask those hard questions and demand answers from both the police and the officers that are accountable and the witnesses that were there as well. And if they lie to us, if they lie to this board, it's going to be the same thing as if they lied to an officer. I will bring charges against them if they lie to this board. I mean, it's the best I can do. I can't think of any way to make this any better. If anybody has suggestions, let me know, because I'm going to basically be drafting all this up and making a more formal proposal, and I'm going to be putting it on my platform page. And we can still leave some things open about exactly how we pick people and what we do with these reports and everything else, but I'm trying to get this thing gelled up as best I can with the community input, and I consider you guys the community. Give me the input. Are you there, Mr. Reeves? You have anything you want to add?
No, I'm here. I'm listening. No, I don't have anything else I want to add. You've answered my questions. Thank you.
Okay. So what do you think? You think we should have some type of a nomination process? You think we should put an ad in the paper?
I don't think you should put an ad in the paper. I do like the nomination aspect. I do like the lottery. But I think it's one of these things that you want to make sure you have the right person for it.
Yeah.
So lottery could be iffy, because you could literally have anybody. So yeah, a community nomination, I do like that. But then again, that becomes a popularity contest, and you don't want to bring politics into it, or people, it's complicated. But I do think that might be the best way to go. Have a pool and then narrow down that pool to your most qualified candidates, and then go from there.
Well, I like the idea of having the lottery for the people that will come in and actually be able to sit and listen to the evidence being presented to this board. I want all of them to be citizens. I don't want a single officer to be in the room. I don't want anybody from the government to be there. Basically, the government should not have any authority in that room at all. The community should be presenting its evidence to the community. And the community should be deciding what they think happened there based on every single thing that this board's able to give them and present them. So if we have one set of qualifications and a process to get these board members in there, and then a second one to have the community that comes in and listens to the evidence, I think the lottery might work good for that. If people want to do it, they put their name in the hats. If we need, say, 20 people for this particular inquiry, then we pick their names out of the hat, or whatever way we do it, we make it a lottery.
How long would these people be part of this committee or part of this board? Would it be how long would the term be?
I don't know. I think that should be up to the community too. If you got a guy in there that you think's doing a good job in your community, at your community board center, and you like him, if you want to keep putting him back in there, do it. If you don't want to, who would I be to come in and say, okay, your job is done? I don't like the idea of saying, okay, you've got a one-year term. What if the guy's just hitting his stride and he's really getting good at this? He's figuring out how to make these deputies do what they're supposed to do, and he's holding them all accountable. Your 1 year's up. Let's put somebody else new in who starts over from scratch again. So it's up in the air. I think the communities themselves should accept or reject who's ever in these boards by themselves some way.
All right. So let's say I'm just spitballing, just questions at the top of my head. We don't have term limits, but let's say every 12 months, the people on the board have a review themselves and make sure they're doing their jobs. Because there's incompetence everywhere. It's not just in the police. It can be in the community. It'd be regular people. How would that go about? Would they just be elected or chosen and then they're that forever? Or will they be a review for themselves?
Well, I like the idea of reviewing them. I think a lot of people may not know that I'm actually going to be implementing a website where we can review all officers. So citizens might not even need to make a complaint. Let's say they were treated rudely. Let's say they felt like their rights were violated. They don't necessarily have to make a complaint. They could actually go to my website and they can review these officers on a 0 to 5-star scale and write a complaint just like Yelp for every officer that's going to be in our agency. So we're going to have that as well. And I wouldn't have a problem putting the community board members on that as well, so that the community can rate their board members. I went to the board over there the other day. I spoke to a Mrs. So-and-so, and she was very helpful. She was wonderful. She took my complaint, or she didn't sound like she cared. I got the feeling she was just brushing me off. And the community can use those same guidelines from within that website to judge and grade their board members. Why not put them on there too?
I think that's a great idea.
I do as well. I agree. That's a good idea.
Well, that's something literally I just thought of this exact moment. I knew I'm doing the police accountability website where they're going to all be rating. I call it Andy's list from Andy Taylor. Basically, what would Andy do? If Andy wouldn't do it, you shouldn't do it either. I didn't see Andy ever beat anybody up. Have you? And so the point I'm getting at is if we have that kind of a board where they can be rated, that's one of the ways that I want the community to put pressure on me. And this is not going to be just for the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department. It's going to be for Clearwater Police, St. Pete Police, Tarpon Springs Police, every police officer. And I'm hoping to roll this thing out nationwide. So literally every person in any community can rate their police officers. And that way, if you've got a police officer's got a 1.8 stars, and he's got all these 42 negative complaints and 5 positive ones. Well, the community can then go back to the police agency. Why do you still have this guy on here? Why aren't you firing him? Why aren't you doing anything about it? And the police industry will literally have no control over those complaints. They'll have no control over that ranking or rating. It's going to be community driven, just like Yelp is. And so that way, if you have another officer that's good, say he's getting 4.9 stars and he's got 50 positive reviews, those are the guys that I want to promote and put in charge of the other guys to teach them how to do things the way they're doing things. So if we have this community board, I think all those board members should be listed on there too. Why not? Community control all the way.
Yeah, I agree with that. How would we protect? I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. I'll write my.
I was gonna ask, how would we protect against inflation on those reviews? Like people just coming in, posting a review, like people on Yelp get angry at something at a restaurant, then they go in there and they just make a crazy review, and they go tell their friends to go and make a crazy review. How do we protect against that?
I don't know about that. One of the things I was thinking about doing initially was that if people have an actual police report or the officer's name in making the report, and they actually can show that they had an interaction with that officer, then their review might count for more. If they want to just come in and just say, I saw this guy, I think it was officer so-and-so, then their review would count as less. If they can't meet a level of at least proving that they had an interaction with that officer, their review might not be counted as much, or maybe it might not be counted at all. The review will be there, but it might not go, they might not be able to access the star rating unless they could prove that they had an interaction. That's the only thing I can think of.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I agree completely.
What I wanted to know, James, is you know how we hear a lot about the unions and their just how strong they are and the limitations of whether it's a police chief or the sheriff to actually reprimand and terminate because of the unions. What have you learned about that? And I'm just curious.
Oh, I know a whole lot about that. I've done research on that for 10 years. The sheriff's union, the police union here in town, the police benevolent association, the contract that they have with the sheriff's office is asinine. Like as an example, Sheriff Galtieri actually signed a union agreement with these people that says if he fires an officer, that officer is entitled to arbitration, meaning an outside third party that decides whether or not the sheriff's firing was lawful. Well, then Sheriff Galtieri signed the agreement that allows the union to pick the arbitrator. I mean, he literally let the union pick who gets to decide who gets fired and who doesn't, which is why it's so hard to fire an officer. Now, that union contract is coming up for reevaluation right after the new term. Guess who's not going to sign it? Me. I don't care what the union says. I don't care if they want to try. They can't strike. It's against the law for them to strike. So the bottom line is I'm not going to allow anything in these union contracts that's going to do anything along those lines at all. But you can still use the union contracts and go through them. Even if I'm under the union contract right now, the way it exists, I found a loophole in there that says that under times of economic hardship or whatever, I have the ability to lay off police officers, and there's not a damn thing the union can do about it. And so if I can't fire them, I'll lay them off. If I have to get rid of that 100 officers, gee, we're not going to be doing cannabis enforcement. Sorry, you're out of a job. Here's your pink slip. And they're gone, and there's not a damn thing the union can do about it. And this is what it takes, is it takes a person at the helm, the one who's running the sheriff's office, to have the will to make things right, to have the want and desire to hold these people accountable. And if you don't have that, it doesn't matter what the contracts say, you're not getting it. So with me in office, I'm going to be figuring out a way to get rid of these dirty guys. Union contract, no union contract. Yes.
There is a clause in the union contract that says if there's a deputy that's interfering with the good operation of the sheriff's office and making the sheriff, making the sheriff's job too difficult the sheriff has the discretion to fire him. I saw that clause in there. So
Yeah, but then he also then gets the right to an arbitration, and then the union gets to pick his arbitrator, and then the arbitrator gets to decide if the sheriff fired him or not. I mean, it's just this vicious circle of unaccountability, and that's why we're at where we're at today. It needs to stop. Stops with me.
But in Florida, they have a right to a union, right?
I don't have a problem with the concept of unions, of collective bargaining, of a group of people saying we should have safe environments to work. Like as an example, they came and they said, we want PPE, personal protection equipment. I don't have a problem with the union doing things like that for the safety and well-being of the officers. I don't want to jeopardize the safety and well-being of these officers either. I'm actually going to care about these guys as hard as it sounds like I'm going to be on them. I will. But if they're doing their job the way they're supposed to, and they're serving the community and they're doing right by everybody, I want to protect them too. So I don't have a problem with having a union. I don't have a problem with negotiating with the union contracts. I'm just not going to give them every single power to do everything that they want to do. I'm going to keep the power to get rid of these guys because I'm going to get rid of these guys. You guys have never heard of a candidate for sheriff talk like this, I know. So another thing I'd like to ask you guys while I've got you here is, okay, after we get done with all this stuff, after they do the report, after they complete their report, after they've had their community review of the evidence, and say the community comes up with a decision that's not the same as the police industries, okay, what do we do with it then? I don't know the answer to that question because I don't know how much authority I have. It's something I'm literally going to have to get in the office, sit down, go through all the documents, sit down with some lawyers and say, what can I do? What do I have the power to do? But I can assure you that no matter what happens in that, if I have the power to do it, I will do it at the sheriff's office. If I can take in some of their reports and make my guys redo it again, if there's a question, I can put something like that into my general orders. I can create a general order that's basically the law of the land at the sheriff's department that says, number one, that all Pinellas County Sheriff's officers are required to work with the board, a board member. They're required to answer their questions, cooperate with them, share evidence with them. And if any officer withholds anything from this board, hides something from this board, intimidates this board, threatens this board, or does anything against that board, I can make that a termination level offense. So I can put teeth in it by just creating these orders. And I can also create orders that forces my investigators to reinvestigate any discrepancies, any issues that the board brings up. That's the best I can do from the outside now. Once I get in, I'll be able to see what else I can do.
I will say that if the board finds discrepancies, that could be grounds for a lawsuit from the alleged victim.
I agree.
And they could use the difference between the sheriff's office or the officers or whoever is in favor of the police officer, use the difference between his report and the community board's report to say, hey, there's a problem here, somebody's lying, and make a lawsuit. So it would be valuable information one way or the other.
Well, I also have another thing that I can do that we didn't touch on because it doesn't really relate too much to the board, but part of the way that the cops get away with everything that they do is because of the way that the use of force policies are written. And like Sheriff Galtieri was up there in Washington, D.C. with Trump signing this new thing, they're going to ban chokeholds. And Galtieri's talking about he banned chokeholds. And I've read both the Trump's and Galtieri's ban chokehold. And at the very bottom of it, it says something to the effect of, unless the officer feels that he is in danger for his life. So I mean, basically, that's the same loophole that they all get through. Am I afraid? Well, just because you're afraid doesn't mean you get to kill somebody. Fear is not a good basis for killing somebody. They slipped out of it used to be necessary force. And what they did was they then created reasonable force. Is it reasonable that he was in fear? If he was in fear, even if it's just a sandwich, even if it's a cell phone, even if he didn't have anything at all, even if he just thought there was a gun, he gets to kill the guy. And that's what's wrong with our use of force policies. But with the use of force policies written that way, it says reasonable. When they do their investigations, they say, yeah, he was terrified. He killed him. Okay, he's getting away with it. Then the police, the state attorney's office, nobody, the civil courts, nobody can do anything to that officer because he was doing his job within the bounds of his job description in the law. And so what I have to do when I go in there, obviously, is change all the use of force parameters. And I already have on my platform all of the Black Lives Matter use of force policies that were created by Campaign Zero. And if you go to Campaign Zero and you look at their use of force policies, that's what I have on my campaign website. I'm going to adopt them because they were done very, very well. And I'm even adding more to them that they don't even have on the Campaign Zero. So now when an officer comes in, instead of it being reasonable, it's now necessary. Was it necessary for you to use that force? Was there anything else you could have done? Did you have to stand in front of that car and shoot through that windshield? No, my use of force policies are going to say you're not allowed to stand in front of the car. You need to make way. My use of force policies are going to say you cannot create the confrontation. You need to take cover. You need to protect yourself rather than kill the other person. So there's all kinds of use of force policies I can put into place. And then what that means is that when they are investigated, my use of force policies are going to be so narrow that their actions better fall within it, because if it doesn't, then they acted outside the bounds of the law and outside the bounds of their job, and they're now open to be terminated, prosecuted, and seek civil penalty. So it has to do with all this stuff put together: the use of force policies, the general orders that I implement, what I have in there as far as what we're going to investigate from our end, what the Board of Accountability does. All of this is going to culminate in a perfect storm against bad officers that are going to hold them accountable. What do you think?
I think it sounds great.
Well, you guys, I don't know whether you guys have my phone number or not. Do you guys have my number? Do you want it?
Sure.
It's 727-599-4374. If you can think of anything else that I forgot, if something comes up, if you talk to somebody else and they've got a great idea, let me know. Over the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be drafting all this together and putting it in more of a hard format to present on my platform. So if you think of anything, if you come up with anything, please just let me know. Ah, I see it. I hope I'm going to rate a little teeny box from you on that.
Actually, there were 2 races that everything else I was solid on. There were 2 races that I wanted to wait a little bit longer on, and yours was one of the 2 races, and the District 1 school board race is the other one. So,
You
having this open, huh?
You doubted me? Seriously?
No, I know both of you guys, and what I was more looking at is the long game. You know, my game is similar to the Trump has to be removed game. So when I look at the game, I'm looking at our ability to get rid of Sheriff Gutierrez. And so when I look at so that's how I approach it. So we'll talk. I'll call you.
All right, sounds good. Well, I think we pretty much covered anything, unless anyone else has something to say. Add? No? Okay. Listen, I appreciate you all taking the time tonight. Thank you so much. And if you have anything else, reach out anytime. I'm always going to be here. As sheriff, I'm going to have an open door policy for everyone. All right. Thank you, guys.